So pardon me if I fly through this. So next slide. So I'm going to be talking about stakeholder perspectives. Next slide, please. So my team is working on task 2, which encompasses 3 subtasks. You'll hear about the first 2 of these today. Let's just move forward. Thank you. So first, I'm going to present a couple of high-level insights from our user assessments. This work has been led by my colleague, Angela Sanguinetti. Next slide, please. So we've been working with the field demonstration projects in CalFlexHub to identify user experience. The aim here is to understand their satisfaction and their experience with load flexible operations in particular. So we work with the technology teams to identify who those users are. And these are defined broadly as building occupants, facility managers, anyone that interacts with the technologies. We've completed assessments across a range of technologies, including residential water heating and HVAC on large campuses. And we have been asking them about things like their motivation to participate, prior knowledge of load flexibility, and any energy or non-energy impacts that they've noticed during the load flexible operations. So we've picked several key insights that we think have implications beyond this particular project, but really just for the development of load flexible technologies in general. Next slide, please. The first is that user interfaces are crucial for user acceptance. They need to do several things. First, they need to explain load flexibility. People need to understand what's happening. They also need to enable key user interactions. Simple things like enabling and disabling load flexible operations. But they could also enable more complex things like providing feedback about what the impact of those load flexibility operations are. Which leads to the next point, which is that almost universally, the participants expressed an interest in finding out about how their participation in load flexible events impacted or would have impacted the grid. And so we think that there's a huge potential for information. We think this holds broadly for customers more generally. And this can be provided in several ways. You can build user interfaces directly into those load flexible devices, or you can have communications coming from utilities or aggregator programs. The feedback should provide concise summaries of load flexible operations and again, those impacts. And it could be the impacts of individual actions or collective actions. We think this has the potential for encouraging ongoing participation, which is a really important thing with load flexibility, right? Not just how do we get people to sign up, but how do we get them to participate again and again and not bail out. And the third thing is that we found some initial hints of rebound effects. Some suggestion that perhaps pre-cooling reduces the tolerance for subsequent setbacks. So there's lots more research that needs to be done here to understand, because of course this is important information to be fed into the automation optimization. Next slide, please. So now we're going to switch gears to the stakeholder needs assessment work that we've done. And a huge thank you to my team here who's worked tirelessly on this. We've just finished our second annual report. Next slide, please. So we conducted in-depth semi-structured interviews with 68 individuals representing 50 different organizations across 4 broad stakeholder groups, which we're classifying as technology providers, service providers, large commercial customers, and environmental and energy interest groups. And I'm going to give you just a little highlight of what we found from these conversations. Next slide, please. So first, at the beginning of the interviews, we provided an overview of California's vision for highly dynamic prices and automated load flexibility. And we did this as a level setting exercise so that everyone we spoke to was operating from the same basic assumptions, had some base level understanding of kind of the framework we're talking about here. And then we asked them to respond to that vision. And mostly we got positive responses. They said it was bold, they said it was ambitious. They quickly followed that up with, how the heck are you going to do this, right? There's lots of implementation challenges here, which is a lot of what the conversation has been about today. And one thing they came up with in particular that came up again and again was grid capacity, right? Is the grid ready to handle it? They also asked tough questions about how dynamic prices overlaps with California's other policies and goals related to energy. So in particular with energy efficiency, they emphasized, this can't be the flavor of the month and we leave energy efficiency behind. These devices need to be efficient first and flexible second. They also wondered how this is going to fit in with other proposals of rate design. So no answers here, just questions, but it's important to understand that stakeholders are wondering, how does this fit into the rest of the things we're trying to do? Next slide, please. We also talked about the technologies themselves, and we asked in particular, are they ready? We found that technology providers generally said yes. Utilities and customers in particular, not so much. And we interpreted their responses as they actually define readiness more holistically, the customers did. So for them, a technology being ready means that it's available, it's affordable, it's reliable, durable, interoperable, all the good things we've been talking about. And how do you make that happen in real life? For them, they want to see more large-scale demonstrations to prove that it's ready in that sense, not just that it works in a lab, but that it actually works in reality. Of course, another key piece to technology readiness is automation. So virtually everybody agreed that you get lots of efficiency benefits from automation. Some were very comfortable with that and comfortable with virtually complete automation. Others, particularly customers, felt that you have to keep the humans in the loop. And in particular, they mentioned safety concerns. They mentioned things that, there's just unpredictability, and a machine can't change the way it's optimized. Only humans know certain aspects of how you need to sort of pivot when something unexpected comes up. So there's, again, no answers there, but there's this tension, this conversation that needs to happen about kind of where to strike that optimal balance between efficiency and control. Next slide, please. So the remainder of the talk will focus on customers. And first, we'll talk about customer priorities. So unprompted, virtually the first thing out of everyone's mouth was customers don't care about energy. We've heard that message today. What they do care about is their core mission. So if they're a business, it's getting the services, the goods to their customers. If it's a household, it's getting those soccer uniforms clean on time, dinner on the table on time, making sure everybody in the household is comfortable. So stakeholders worried that perhaps there was not enough load flexibility in practical terms as we think of sort of the technical potential for it. So they said that really the first line of defense has to be in the technology development itself, right? The technology has to absorb that flexibility as much as possible. Let's put as little on the customers as possible. So energy storage, of course, came up a lot in that context. Next slide, please. Bill savings was another huge topic of conversation. And most stakeholders believed that fairly significant energy savings, bill savings, would be required to encourage voluntary participation in dynamic rates. But they also wondered if there's actually much potential for that. So is there political will to create huge differentials across customers? And is there economic potential? People cited the fact that in California, electricity bills are relatively low. Is there enough potential to drive those down to actually move people to volunteer? They did recognize that probably a minority of customers would be interested in participating based on the environmental benefits. Those would be because they align with the residential customers' values, or on the commercial side, because it helps facilitate carbon emissions reporting requirements. Next slide, please. So given all the complications that I've just described, most stakeholders felt that voluntary participation, while politically feasible, is likely not going to get enough participation to achieve the goals that are required. So we were surprised to hear most people say they thought that this would need to be mandatory. They quickly followed that up with, but they recognized that that would be politically challenging. So again, no answers here, just some questions and some challenges. They did want to point out the fact that if you can get broad participation, whether it's voluntary through lots of incentives or because you've defaulted customers in, you would effectively spread the burden so widely that it would hopefully be imperceptible to any individual customer, as we heard earlier today with Commissioner McAllister. Next slide, please. So the final topic on customers was disadvantaged communities. And one theme that came up several times was the ethics of engaging disadvantaged communities. One group sort of felt like, it's not ethical to ask them to make sacrifices on behalf of the grid. They're already making sacrifices in terms of service quality. We can't ask them to do more. Other people felt strongly that if we leave them out, that's not ethical either. So I think where we landed is that to the extent that they benefit from participating, we should do everything we can to facilitate that. But that really has to be the threshold. There has to be a benefit. It can't be net neutral. Facilitating the participation of disadvantaged communities would require special outreach to overcome language, cultural, and trust barriers. We heard some of this earlier this morning. Of course, there's familiar infrastructure limitations related to panels, Wi-Fi service. There's split incentive problems when you look at installing new devices. And then on the question of impacts, if we think it's important for market rate customers, it's perhaps even more important to offer bill savings for low-income customers. But is there any scope for that for those that are on large rates that keep their bills down? Is there any scope for savings there, or much savings? In addition, stakeholders told us that low-income customers tend to be really averse to bill uncertainty. So we need to protect against the possibility of spikes. Last slide, please. So we'll end on this. A number of people communicated the idea that we've got one shot to get this right. And if we have missteps early on, or we roll this out in a way that's unpalatable to customers or takes customers by surprise, negatively impacts them in a way they're not expecting, we could be setting ourselves back years, possibly even a decade. And the way forward is continued collaboration. So more conversations like this, more projects like this, to get everyone in the room kind of wrestling with the difficult topics that I've highlighted today. So thank you, and I look forward to your comments and questions in the break. Thanks.
Sarah, that was a great summary. Sarah's been navigating the complexity of all the different CalFlexHub partners and technologies, and so that was a really nice summary. And similar to what Beth said, she talked about the need for continuing collaboration. So I